in just a couple of minutes, the President of the United States will be announcing that it is now conclusive that Bashar Assad and the Syrian butchers have used chemical weapons, which is, as we all know, a red line which the President of the United States announced that Bashar Assad cannot cross. Now, Assad has been very clever in using small amounts rather than large amounts. But the fact is now we are not the first country to conclude that the Assad regime has used chemical weapons in their attacks on the population of Syria. The President also will announce that we will be assisting the Syrian rebels in Syria by providing them with weapons and other assistance. I applaud the President's decision. 93,000 people dead later, over 1 million refugees, the countries in the surrounding region erupting into sectarian violence, the clear spreading of this conflict into a regional conflict. Sunni, Shia, Saudi, Iran, Russia, all major players. And we see that Jordan is overwhelmed with refugees. Lebanon is experiencing sectarian violence. Iraq is unraveling, and the entire region is bordering on chaos, not to mention the massacre and genocide that's taking place in Syria. So I applaud the President's decision, and I appreciate it. But the President of the United States had better understand that just supplying weapons is not going to change the equation on the ground of the balance of power. These people of the Free Syrian Army need weapons and heavy weapons to counter tanks and aircraft. They need a no-fly zone, and Bashar Assad's air assets have to be taken out and neutralized. And we can do that without risking a single American airplane. We can do it by cratering the runways with cruise missiles, moving the Patriot missiles closer to the border, and protecting a safe zone where they can organize, where they can work, where they can coordinate with the civilian side of the Syrian National Army, and they can have a chance of success. Mr. President, today, Bashar Assad, thanks to Iranians, thanks to Russia, thanks to Hezbollah pouring in by the thousands, thanks to people flowing in from all over the Middle East, including from Iraq back into Syria, they are losing and they're being massacred and they're sustaining incredibly heavy casualties. It's terrible. So I applaud the President's decision. I applaud the fact that he has now acknowledged what the French and others and all the rest of us knew, that Bashar Assad is using chemical weapons. But just to provide additional weapons to the Syrian National Army is not enough. We've got to change the equation on the battleground. And if I might say, I have seen and been in conflicts where there was gradual escalation. They don't win. If all we're going to do is supply weapons, then there will be a commensurate resupply by the Iranians and the Russians and others. So I thank the President for acknowledging that the Syrians are using chemical weapons and massacring their own people, and I applaud his decision to provide additional weapons. I do not, every ounce, every bone in my body knows that simply providing weapons will not change the battlefield equation, and we must change the battlefield equation. Otherwise, you are going to see a regional conflict, the consequences of which we will be paying for a long, long time. And I yield to my colleague from South Carolina.
Well, thank you. I would like to add my voice to the President's decision to act, because I think action by the United States and the international community is required. What does it matter to the average American that we contain this war in Syria and that it ends sooner rather than later? The chemical weapons that now have been acknowledged to be used by Assad against his own people, my goal is to make sure they're not used against us or Israel, our allies throughout the world. And if we don't stop this war, the chemical weapons caches that number in the hundreds of thousands of weapons that could be used, could be deployed, that could kill thousands of Americans or Israelis or people that are aligned with us. So really the president's decision to intervene comes from an escalation of the use of chemical weapons by Assad. As Senator McCain has indicated, the threats to our country are not just from the chemical weapons, but from a regional deterioration. The sitting president of the Senate today, we were in Jordan. The Jordanian government has to accommodate over 560,000 Syrian refugees. 60,000 Syrian children are attending Jordanian schools. The economy in Jordan is about to collapse, and if we lose the king of Jordan, we've lost one of the last moderate voices in the Mideast. So this war has a rock. Radical Islamists are flowing in on the Sunni side and the Shia side. There's al-Qaeda elements that are filling in the vacuum because the war has gone on so long. Now you got Hezbollah, a radical Islamic Shia group, and this is turning into a civil war within Syria and a regional conflict. So, to the President, your decision today to get involved is welcome news, but as Senator McCain said, Mr. President, the goal is to end the war, and the only way this war is going to end quickly and on our terms is to neutralize the air assets that Assad enjoys, the air power advantage he has over the rebels. We can crater the runways. There are 4 air bases he uses. We can stop the planes from flying. We can shoot planes down without having one boot on the ground. That's not necessary. But as to Senator McCain's point, the longer this war goes, the more damage to our allies, the more likely the chemical weapons can be used, not just against Syrians, but against us and others. My biggest fear about the war in Syria is that the chemical weapons fall in the hands of radical Islamists, and they're closer today than they've ever been in achieving that goal. So, Mr. President, you made the right call today, but if we don't follow up to end this war with neutralizing Assad's air power, having a no-fly zone so the rebels can reorganize, and when you supply arms to the rebels, we will look long and hard who we give the arms to. But here's the good news. We don't need to give them a bunch of anti-aircraft capability if we crater the runways through the international community using our assets. If we neutralize the air power by blowing up the runway, you don't have to provide the rebels a bunch of anti-aircraft capability. If we'll provide a no-fly zone using Patriot missile batteries, you can protect the people without interjecting massive weapons into the conflict. So, Senator McCain, you've been right about this for a couple of years. This is a big day, and I would conclude with this. Assad is winning. The reason the Russians are providing him more weapons, the reason Hezbollah is in Syria, the reason that the Iranians are so bold is that he is clearly winning, and it is not in our national interest for him to win, because the Israelis cannot allow the technology being sold to Assad by the Russians to be present, because it will hurt their national security. So I hope by this intervention today to get involved after chemical weapons have been used, that the tide of battle will turn. And if it doesn't turn, it will have catastrophic results for our national security in the region as a whole. So, Mr. President, you chose wisely today to get involved. We support you, but the goal is not to help the rebels. The goal is to end the war before chemical weapons can be used against us and we lose the king of Jordan and the entire Mideast goes up in flames.
Could I ask my colleague, you remember when the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff appeared before our committee well over a year ago and said, unsolicited, it's inevitable that Bashar Assad will fall. You remember that? This is from our highest-ranking military officer and our highest defense official as Secretary of Defense. At that time, I said, what makes you so sure? How can you be sure? With the help from Hezbollah, from the help of the Russians at that time, and the equipment and arms that they were getting. Don't worry, the fall of Assad is inevitable. Is there anybody today that believes that Bashar Assad is going to fall? I don't think so, because the facts on the ground are he's winning, and the slaughter continues. And the latest is 93,000 people who have been massacred, and as the senator from South Carolina just stated, with well over 1 million refugees, which are overwhelming the neighboring countries. Now, it's my understanding that the president has not made the final decision on arming, but he has made the decision that chemical weapons have been used. I think it's obvious that they will be providing weapons. They need a no-fly zone. And I would say that there are military officials in the Pentagon who will say you can't do it and you have to have total mobilization of every single reserve in the world and in the United States, and it's so hard. Well, we spend tens of billions of dollars a year on defense, and if our military can't establish a no-fly zone, then by God, American taxpayer dollars have been terribly wasted. And we ought to have an investigation as to why we can't handle a situation in a third-rate country. I believe we can. I know we can. I know because I talk to people like the head of our Central Command, former head of our Central Command, and our former head of NATO, and others, like the architect of the surge. We can go in and establish a no-fly zone, and we can change this equation on the battlefield. Finally, I would ask my colleague, you know, we understand that the American people are war-weary. We're weary because of what happened in Iraq, and we remain in Afghanistan. And Iraq is unraveling, by the way, but Americans are weary. They're tired of reading the casualty lists and the funerals and the terrible tragedies that have befallen American families. That's why neither I nor the senator from South Carolina are saying we want boots on the ground. In fact, we don't want boots on the ground. We know it would be counterproductive. We know it would not lead to victory. But we do know we can provide incredible assistance and change this battlefield equation. And finally, because a lot of Americans haven't paid perhaps as much attention as some of us, and maybe because they're war-weary, I think it would be wise of the President of the United States to go on national television and explain to the American people why we are stopping this genocide, why we are assisting these people who are struggling for the same things that we stand for and believe in, why the United States of America went to Bosnia with air power, not boots on the ground, why we went to Kosovo and didn't put boots on the ground, and how we can help these people while alleviate the unspeakable misery of the Syrian people. And I wonder if my colleague from South Carolina agrees with that.
I would recommend the president educate the American people about what's going on in the Mideast, because it's scary. It's really scary. The Iranians are marching toward a nuclear weapon. Israel is becoming more surrounded by radical Islamic nations, not less. The king of Jordan is teetering. And if we lose him, God knows what's going to happen in the Mideast. I would suggest the president take it one step further. Explain to the American people what happens to us if these chemical weapons Assad has used against his own people fall into the hands of radical Islamists who want to do more than just take care of Syria. My big fear is that weapons of mass destruction are going to fall into the hands of radical Islamists, either in Iran or Syria, if we don't act quickly. And the only reason thousands of Americans have been killed in the war on terror, and not millions, they can't get the weapons to kill millions of us. If they could, they would. So I would argue very strongly it is in our national security interest to make sure the war in Syria ends, that Assad is displaced. And finally, Senator McCain, you're right. He is winning. He was supposed to be gone last year. He's never going to be displaced until the tide of battle changes. The way you change the tide of battle is you neutralize his air power. You can do that without mobilizing every reservist, including me. It can be done, and it should be done, and it's in our interest to do it. One last thought. If we do not address the chemical weapons compromise in Syria and end this war before these chemical weapons flow out of Syria, not only will Israel be in the crosshair of radical Islamists with weapons of mass destruction capability, it is only a matter of time till they come here. The next bomb that goes off in a place like Boston could have more than nails and glass in it, because the people who want these weapons in Syria, trying to develop nuclear capability in Iran, if you don't think they're coming after us, you're naive. I know we're war-weary, but I hope we're not too weary to protect our children and grandchildren and ourselves from a threat that's real. I wish it would go away, but you don't make these things go away by wishing. You confront them, and the sooner you confront it, the better off we'll be.
Could I just mention one other? I know that one of my colleagues is waiting on the floor. There's no experience that I think anyone can have to see the terrible wages of war than to go to a refugee camp. The senator from South Carolina and I have been to refugee camps on both the Syrian and the Turkish and the Jordanian border. To see thousands of people living in terribly primitive conditions. To see, as I did in one camp we visited, there had been a rainstorm the night before and people literally living in water. To see the desperation on the faces of the people and the children. And I've had many moving experiences while visiting these refugee camps, but I also think there's an aspect that we ought to understand and appreciate as Americans. They're angry and they're bitter because we wouldn't come to their assistance. I'll never forget a woman who was a school teacher who was escorting me around the refugee camp that said, Senator McCain, you see all these children here? You see all these children running around everywhere? And she said, these children are going to take revenge on those who refuse to help them to stop this slaughter by Bashar Assad. So there are long-term implications, both on a humanitarian side as well as other aspects of this issue. And believe me, it is the greatest blow to Iran if Bashar Assad fell in 25 years. So it's not just a humanitarian issue. If Bashar Assad goes, Hezbollah is disconnected from Iran. The whole equation in the Middle East dramatically changes. If Iran and Bashar Assad succeed, you're going to see a direct threat of the state of Israel, which the Israelis understand, coming from the Golan Heights. So this is not only a humanitarian issue, it is a national security issue. If Iran succeeds in keeping Bashar Assad in power, that will send a message throughout the Middle East about Iranian power, Iranian ability, and Iranian ability to change governments throughout the Middle East. So there's a lot at stake here. I hope the President will go to a no-fly zone and give these people the weapons with which they defend themselves as Russian arms and Iranian arms pour into the country on the side of Bashar Assad. My friends, it's not a fair fight. And we know in that kind of climate and terrain, air power is the deciding factor. So I thank my colleague from South Carolina. Mr. President, I appreciate the patience of the senator from Texas, and I yield the floor.